Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, here for the Daily Blob, where I shake my brain nipples every day to get some of that dirty YouTube money so I can afford to provide you folks hands-on, in-person technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do in Durham, North Carolina. Silicon Dojo, silicondojo.com. We have a class coming up on AI and web scraping. We have a class coming up on extending AI capabilities using REST APIs. We have a whole bunch of other classes coming up. If you're interested, take a look at silicondojo.com to see what the schedule is. Do remember, free to end user is not free. That's why I shake my brain nips every day. If you want to help support the project, there is a donor box link down below. And with that, let's get into the trade war. All right, so we have this global battle currently going on between the United States in one corner and China in the other. Who will win? Who the hell knows? Will both sides lose? There is a very good chance. I've heard from some of the Americans out there. Some of the Americans are very proud. They're like, Eli, you don't understand. China is doing worse than us. And it's like, great. So what you're telling me is China's gonna starve first. They're gonna starve to death first. See the problem with that particular argument is we also starve to death. See, here's the thing, as an American, I mean, call me a funny buddy here, but as an American, I would prefer if my country doesn't starve to death, regardless of the order. I don't want to be like, yay, we were the last ones to abjectly fail, because that's still abject failure. But anyways, that's like one of the weird mentalities I see in the United States right now. They're like, Eli, you don't understand. This is hurting China more than it's hurting us. And it's like, yeah, but it's hurting us. It's hurting us very badly. And I think there's probably better ways to do this horse crap. But anyways, it is interesting to see the decoupling between the United States and China, and it's interesting to see how that all works out, right? You have the senile old loser in the White House, the mafioso wannabe in chief, and he is making diktats, right? So he's just coming out, right? He gets cracked out on his Diet Coke at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he dictates something to happen, right? And that is what it is. I mean, how interesting is it to see the ravings of senile old loser? That's actually not that interesting. What is more curious is to see how those ravings then affect actual CEOs and actual business processes and all that kind of thing. And to wonder where this is all going to, fall at the end of the day. And so one of the big things right now with the trade war or whatever between the U.S. and China is, one way or another, we are decoupling. We are decoupling from China. Now, we may be decoupling our rail car as the train goes uphill and we have no brakes, but we are decoupling. And it's curious, again, to see like how that is all fleshing out. So one of the big things that's coming up right now is GM, General Motors. So one of our big car companies in the United States that makes a fraction of the vehicles that China does. Anyways, they look like they are going to try to completely decouple from China. GM wants parts makers to pull supply chains from China. This actually comes from Reuters. We're getting it from a secondhand source because that's how you have to do things nowadays. Anyways, and so what's kind of curious here is the idea is that GM wants all of their suppliers to decouple from China to the point that they're actually investing in mining, like lithium mining and that type of thing, with the idea of literally pulling all of their suppliers out of the Chinese supply chain. And this is one of the interesting things that'll be curious to see how all this flushes out at the end of the day. So I sit here and I rail about the senile old loser in office. I rail about the Nobel Peace Prize winning president that pointed all of our weapon systems at China. And when I do this railing, I think one of the problems out there, especially from the Chinese side, is they think I support China. See, a lot of people think I support China. And here's the thing. No, I just do not support the destruction of my own country. There is a difference. There is a difference there. And I think one of the curious things from the Chinese side, I think a lot of the Chinese folks out there don't quite grasp, is the whole concept of fuck around and find out, right? There's a lot of Chinese supremacists out there right now, and they're hee-hawing as hard as the MAGA folks in the US are as they say fuck around and find out, whitey. And here's the problem. Yeah, Chinaman, you fuck around and we're all gonna find out. Because one of the big issues that's going on right now with China, right? China got brought into the World Trade Organization. The reason they were brought into the World Trade Organization was to uplift their country, right? Over the past 25 years, as they've been in the World Trade Organization, they have been fucking everybody. Everybody knows the fucking that the Chinaman has been doing to the rest of the world, but everybody has looked the other way. The politicians look the other way because, hey, we're uplifting 1.4 billion people, helping to uplift 1.4 billion people out of poverty, and this will bring democracy to China. What? Why? Why is this going to bring democracy to China? Who the fuck knows? Who the fuck knows? But Whitey believes it, and if Whitey believes it, by God, you can take that shit to the bank, right? Anyways, the politicians have thought this is going to bring democracy to China, right? The corporations that have gone there and given up their intellectual property, the idea is, hey, look, they have a market of 1.4 billion people that they can sell to, right? And so the thing is, China has been fucking around, right? And our politicians and our corporations and everybody else has been fucking around. And the problem is it's just not working. It's just not fundamentally working, right? The Chinese system is breaking the global system. One of the things the Chinese people watching these videos don't seem to fucking grasp, right, as I scream about the senile old loser in office that we're gonna get the fuck rid of in about 3.5 years, is, right, this engineering mentality, right? That's the interesting thing. I have the Chinese viewers like, well, that's the thing about our politicians. Our politicians are engineers. They don't worry about legal things and all that kind of stuff. And here's the thing, yeah, I mean, your politicians don't worry so much about the humanity of the situation. I mean, your politicians are more focused on, again, the workflows and the logistic systems and the robots and all that kind of stuff. They're not really worried about breaking the human beings under their relentless pressure to move forward. And so one of the big issues that we're going to start seeing is that China is breaking the system. The system that China relies on in order to improve their society is also the system that they are fracturing, which is going to become a bigger and bigger problem as time goes by. And so what's interesting here with GM wanting the parts makers to pull supply chains from China, I think we're going to start seeing more of this just as kind of like the inertia as things go. Again, the whole idea of if we know China is breaking the systems, right? In order to improve China, China will destroy everybody else's industry. Basically, I think what you're going to start seeing is more of the industries around the world really genuinely asking the question of, is it worth it, right? One of the big arguments has been, look, you have to kowtow to China in order to get access to a 1.4 billion person market, right? Again, the United States is 330 million. I don't know, maybe it's now 360 million. I get lost with that kind of thing. But anyways, we're only about 300 million people. So China is somewhere between 4 to 5x our size. So in order to get that market, you have to do what China wants. But here's the thing. There's a good chance you're not going to get that market. There's a good chance you're not going to get that market. There's a good chance you're going to go there, you're going to build up the factories, you're going to train everybody in the whole 9 yards, and then not only are you not going to get the China market, you're also going to lose every other goddamn market around the world. Is that worth it in any way, shape, or form? And I think a lot of companies and a lot of folks are just going to decide it is not worth it. As I've talked about before, I disagree with how Trump is doing things. That's one of the weird things here, is the problem is from a 30,000 foot view, I agree with the concepts. I just don't agree with the actual policies this jackass is putting through. We need to decouple from China. China's incessant need to continuously grow at a breakneck pace is going to destroy the other countries out there that deal with them. And so the question is if we have to decouple, the question is how do you decouple in such a way that we don't end up starving to death? That's all I'm saying. I just don't want my country to starve to death. Being the last country to starve to death. I mean, you are a winner. You did win. You survived the longest. Anyways, now a story. General Motors wants its parts makers to pull supply chains from China. It's a sign of the automaker's frustration with geopolitical disruptions to their operations. The sources said the U.S. auto major has told several thousand of its suppliers to entirely clear their supply chains of parts from the country. I think that's an interesting thing to be thinking about too. Again, when we start thinking about these these global supply chains, the disaster that we've seen with Nexperia is many times, right, the supply chain isn't just for the parts that come into GM, but it's the parts that come in to GM's vendors, and the parts that come into the vendors of the vendors, and the parts that come into the vendors of vendors of the vendors of the vendors, right? With a lot of the Nexperia chips that we've been talking about, one of the big issues is not simply that Nexperia chips go directly into a car. The Nexperia chips go to a company like Bosch or another one of those kinds of companies. They get put into a subsystem that then gets sold to the auto manufacturers, right? And that's one of the big problems with how the supply chain has spread out all over the world. It becomes very difficult to understand who owns what. Again, you don't want to be the Netherlands. You don't want to be the Netherlands and seize the headquarters of a company, only to realize all the valuable bits of the company aren't actually in your country. Right. Anyways, they further add the automaker has given some suppliers a 2-year deadline to end their China sourcing ties. I think this is also going to be an interesting thing. One of the things, if you look at what's going on with China right now, factory production has actually gone down a rather decent degree with all the trade war stuff and all that other kind of thing going on. One of the interesting questions is what happens if more companies start specifically, right, intentionally trying to de-Chinify their supply chain. What does that do to China, to the Chinese economy? It's interesting, right? A lot of people out there is like, oh, Eli, you need to start talking to more Chinese people. Again, I've talked to a lot of Chinese people. One of the interesting things is to listen to Chinese politicians. You want to get scared shitless? You want to shit yourself? You actually start listening to what the Chinese politicians are actually stating. Listen to the things that they actually say. Don't read between the lines. Don't add additional crap. You actually listen to what the Chinese politicians talk about their country and their incessant need for growth. That they have to grow, right? Their agreement, the agreement between the government and the people is growth. If they don't grow, if the government does not continuously show growth for the country, things get very icky. Things get very, very icky. And so what happens? What happens when the rest of the world intentionally starts decoupling from China? GM is said to have approached some suppliers with a directive late last year, but the move took on more urgency more recently due to the escalating U.S.-China trade battle. The sources added GM executives had said it is part of a wider strategy to improve the company's supply chain resiliency. The GM effort targets parts and materials that go into cars built in North America. The automaker had already been among the most active car companies to try and lower their reliance on China for battery materials and computer chips. It has partnered with a U.S.-based rare earths company and invested in a lithium mine in Nevada for future electric vehicle battery materials. So it'll be curious to see, how all this flushes out at the end of the day. Let's see. Last month, GM CEO Mary Barra described efforts to move more of the company's supply chain to the United States. So that's one of the things, too, again, with Trump's policy. Oh, if you're going to be nice for Trump, we're going to play devil's advocate. We're going to play Satan's advocate here. One of the arguments for Trump on this whole thing with Trump is the idea that it may be painful now, but it's not actually painful now. It's like, you might deal with inflation now, except for the fact that you're not dealing with inflation. This might be painful now, except that it's not painful. Anyways, one of the arguments, if you'll go for it, is that this might be painful now, but the idea is not what the United States looks like in 2025. The concept is, what does the United States look like in 2035? And one of the things I'll say, having been on this planet almost 50 years now, is amazing how quickly things can change, how quickly a decade can change things. I mean, I remember when China came into the WTO, and hey, great. They create knockoff crap. We get more cheap, dishes or furniture or whatever. Right? Nobody really saw the downside of that. And 25 years later, people are like, oh my golly, right? I remember that, right? From that was the laugh line from Back to the Future, right? I saw Back to the Future when it was actually in the theater. And the laugh line was going back to the 1950s, I guess it was, with Marty McFly. And the scientist is there, and he sees a piece of equipment that was built in Japan in the 1980s. And he goes, oh, this must be a piece of garbage. Right? Because in 1950s America industrialization versus 1950s Japanese industrialization, the idea was all Japan does is basically put out crap. Right? Well, by the 1980s, Japan was a leader in manufacturing in the whole 9 yards. So we've seen the same thing with China, right? They've gone from the idea, all they do is copy, all they do is put out crap, to now, again, Jensen Huang is saying they have 50% of all of the AI researchers in the entire world are in China, right? There's this path. But one of the big problems for a lot of folks across the board, whatever kind of supremacist you are, whether you're a whitey supremacist or whether you're China supremacist, is one of the problems is people think the path that you are on is the path you will always be on. And as we've learned, or as I've learned in a couple of decades being on this planet, that's not how the world works. My God, you're just sitting there, waking up in the morning, drinking your cup of coffee, reading the Wall Street Journal about how Bear Stearns fell apart, going, sucks to be them. Sucks to be them. And then you go about it to your job. You don't realize about a year later, you're going to get it up the hoo-ha out behind the 7-Eleven. Anyways, and so one of the interesting things to be thinking about this, right, is the whole question of whether Trump's policies are good or bad. Does it start to create an inertia? Does it start to create a movement that will put us into an entirely different position, a decade from now? I'll be curious to see, basically, where this will go for all of us. Whitey and the Chinaman combined. I don't think either of us are doing well. Now I know I'm gonna have some of the Chinamen out there. Some of the Chinamen be like, Eli's saying bad things about China. Look, I don't think either of us are doing this shit well. Let me be clear. I am fucking furious with my country. But remember, it's my country. I speak out very vociferously about the stupid shit my country does because it is my country. And I don't want my country to starve at any point in time. I don't care if we're the winners. If at the end of the day we starve to death, we're still fucking dead. Right? But on the other hand, again, for the Chinese people out there, you folks have been fucking around for 25 years. You folks have been fucking around with the system for 25 years. And it's gonna fuck you all too. So yeah, I don't think either side is playing this particular game particularly well. But anyways, what do you think? What do you think about GM trying to pull their entire supply chain out of China? And as they try to pull their entire supply chain out of China, one of the things we've seen with these big industrial players, companies like Walmart and the rest of it, once they start forcing their vendors to do things, their vendors are doing it, which basically means everybody else who buys from that particular vendor, right? That decree also affects all of those other people. Once you start seeing companies like GM do this, are other companies going to get on the bandwagon, and then we're going to have an inertia going in some, other different direction? Where do you think all of this is going to go? Put your thoughts down below, and tell me if you're from China. If you're from China, please insult the shit out of my China cabinet. I expect to hear some really good insults, some strong Chinese insults about my China cabinet, because apparently that's a laugh line. Apparently I get all these Chinese people look at his China cabinet. You proud of your China cabinet? I'm like, I don't. That's literally not a cabinet. They're shelves. There's shelves. Do you have shelves? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I assumed you had shelves. Maybe you don't have shelves over there in China. I don't know. Give us some good, strong Chinese insults about my China cabinet behind me. Anyways, if you like these videos, give us a thumbs up. If you hate these videos, give us a thumbs down. Call me amazing, call me a dumbass. Just be a real Lutnick and give us a good, strong American or Chinese comment down below. Do remember I do these videos in order to fund Silicon Dojo, silicondojo.com, free to user hands-on technology education that empowers you to do whatever the hell it is you want to do in Durham, North Carolina. You can take a look at the website at silicondojo.com to see what our current schedule is. We have AI and web scraping coming up, extending AI capabilities with REST APIs coming up in another few weeks. Many more classes are coming down the pike, so take a look at the websites. Do remember free to user is not free. That's why I shake my brain nips here. That's why I show off my China cabinet every day. So if you want to help support my project, there is a donor box link down below. And with that, see y'all later.